People say marriage is about sharing everything. I just didn't realize everything included my bank account, my mother's property, and my dignity, packaged neatly and handed to my husband's girlfriend like a gift basket. Love, it seems, is the only contract where you can pay in full and still end up bankrupt. It was 3:12 a.m. when the sound of my husband's voice cut through the quiet of our bedroom. At first, I thought I was dreaming, but then I realized my eyes were open, and I could hear every word. He was in the kitchen, speaking low, but not low enough. The clink of a glass, the scrape of a chair, and then, her name. "Lena, you know I can't stop thinking about you." The words stabbed into me like ice. I froze in bed, the darkness pressing against my skin. Lena? That was the name of his assistant, the young woman he'd hired 6 months ago at his auto shop. I'd met her once, when she stopped by our house to drop off paperwork. She'd been polite, smiling shyly, acting almost nervous around me. I'd told myself it was nothing. I had been exhausted that night, just like every night lately. Working double shifts at the diner, picking up extra hours wherever I could, all to help pay for the shop's expansion. His dream, not mine. We'd taken out a small loan, but most of the money came from the savings I'd built over 10 years, money my late mother had left me in her will. "Don't worry," he whispered into the phone. "She trusts me completely, signs anything I put in front of her. The timing's perfect." My heart slammed in my chest. Timing? What timing? I held my breath, straining to hear every word. He chuckled softly. "Once I get the last transfer in place, we can disappear. She won't even see it coming." I felt my fingers curl into the blanket, my mother's savings, the down payment on our house, every extra tip I'd saved instead of buying new clothes. He wasn't just cheating, he was planning to take everything. "I told you," he continued, "another 2 weeks tops. The business accounts will be cleaned out, and with the power of attorney she signed last month, it's all perfectly legal." The memory hit me like a blow. Just 3 weeks ago, he'd brought home papers, saying it would make things easier if he could handle certain financial matters since I was working so much. "It's just for the shop, babe," he'd said. "I'll take care of the boring stuff." I'd signed, without reading closely, without questioning. From the kitchen came the sound of his laugh, low and satisfied. "By the time she wakes up to what's going on, I'll be long gone." I wanted to get up, to storm into the kitchen and scream at him, but something inside me said, "Don't move. Don't speak. Not yet." The conversation ended with him promising to see her tomorrow night. His footsteps came toward the bedroom. I quickly rolled onto my side, pulling the blanket over my shoulder, breathing slow and even. He slipped into bed, smelling faintly of whiskey. Within minutes, he was snoring. I stared into the dark, my chest burning, my mind spinning. This wasn't just betrayal, it was an ambush. And I had just overheard the opening shots of a war I didn't even know I was in. I didn't know how or when, but one thing was certain. I was going to make him regret every single word he said tonight. The rest of the night, I didn't sleep. My mind kept replaying every conversation, every sweet gesture that now felt like poison. I thought about the weekends he'd insisted I work extra shifts because the shop needs every penny right now. I thought about how he'd been more attentive lately, not in a loving way, but in a watchful, calculating way. And I remembered Lena's awkward smile that day in our kitchen. Maybe it wasn't nerves. Maybe it was guilt. By 5 a.m., I'd made a decision. I wouldn't confront him yet. Not without proof. Not without a plan. If he was going to try to rob me blind, I'd make sure he walked into a trap instead. The alarm buzzed at 6:30. He yawned, stretched, and kissed my cheek like nothing was wrong. "Long day ahead," he said. "Don't wait up for me tonight." I smiled faintly, hiding the bile in my throat. "Sure, I'll be busy anyway." The moment he left, I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the spot where he'd sat hours earlier, whispering to his lover about my money. My mother's money. She'd worked herself into an early grave in that textile factory, always telling me, "Baby, this is so you'll have choices in life." And here I was, about to lose it all to a man who thought I was too tired and too stupid to see what was happening. I opened the file cabinet in the living room. The power of attorney was there, tucked neatly into the folder labeled legal. I read it properly this time, my hands trembling. He had access to everything. Our house, my savings, even my small retirement account. I felt sick. But I also felt something else. Cold, sharp focus. I pulled out my phone and started typing notes. Dates, odd comments he'd made, moments when his behavior shifted. I remembered the way he always checked the mailbox before I could, the sudden business trips that popped up with no warning, the times he'd been overly curious about my work schedule. At 9 a.m., I called in sick to the diner. My boss was concerned. This was my first sick day in over a year, but I told her I just needed a day to rest. That was a lie. I needed a day to start hunting. I began with the laptop we shared. He wasn't as careful as he thought. There were searches for divorce attorneys, guides on protecting assets during separation, and even one that made my stomach twist. How to prove a spouse abandoned the marriage. He was building a case against me. I clicked through his email. He'd left it signed in. Messages to Lena stretched back months, flirty at first, then increasingly conspiratorial. One from just last week made my blood run cold. The loan's almost paid off. Once I get her account drained, we'll have enough to get out of here. Keep her distracted. Make her think she's still in control. I sat back in my chair, staring at the screen. My husband wasn't just cheating on me. He was preparing to destroy me. Financially, legally, and personally. And if he thought I'd let him walk away with everything my mother left me, he had no idea who he was dealing with. My name is Claire Mitchell. I'm 35 years old. Born and raised in a small town in Ohio where everyone knows your name and your business. People here remember me as Ellen's daughter. My mother was a fighter. She worked in the textile mill for nearly 30 years, double shifts most weeks, raising me alone after my father walked out when I was 7. We didn't have much, but she made sure I had everything that mattered. A safe home, food on the table, and the belief that hard work could build a better future. When she passed away 5 years ago from a sudden stroke, I felt like the ground had been ripped from under me. She left me her modest savings, about $82,000, money she called my freedom fund. She told me to use it for something that would make my life secure, something she couldn't give me while she was alive. I'd been working at a local diner for nearly 12 years by then, a job I loved despite the long hours and aching feet. The regulars were like family. I lived in a small rented house, drove an old but reliable Honda, and spent my nights reading or crocheting blankets for charity. Life was simple. Then came Derek. I met him when he came into the diner one rainy afternoon. He was charming, funny, and had the kind of smile that made you feel like the only person in the room. He told me about his auto repair business, how he wanted to expand it but needed a partner who believed in him. I didn't know it then, but he was already telling me exactly what I needed to hear. We dated for a year before getting married. It felt fast, but he made me feel safe. He moved into my rental at first, but within months he was talking about buying a house we could call our own. That's when I made my first mistake. I used my mother's freedom fund as the down payment on a little 2-bedroom house. I thought she'd be proud. The second mistake came a year later, when Derek pitched the idea of expanding his shop. "This is our chance, Claire," he said. "We could double our income in a few years." I believed him. I invested what was left of the savings into his business. I also started picking up extra shifts to help cover the loan we took for the rest of the expansion costs. For the past 2 years, my life has been a loop. Wake up early, work 10 hours, come home, cook dinner, fall into bed. Derek always said he was handling the finances so I wouldn't have to stress. I thought it was kindness. Now I know it was strategy. I'm not the kind of woman people think of as a fighter. I'm quiet, polite, the type who bakes cookies for neighbors at Christmas. But I learned from my mother that strength isn't about loud words. It's about what you do when life tries to break you. And right now, life had just shown me exactly what kind of fight I was in. If you'd asked me a year ago to describe my life, I would have told you it was ordinary, but good. Derek and I had a rhythm. He worked long hours at the shop. I worked long hours at the diner. We didn't have kids, but we talked about maybe trying in a year or 2. On Sundays, we'd take the truck out to the lake or barbecue in the backyard. From the outside, we looked like any hardworking couple building a future together. But there were cracks. I just didn't see them for what they were. Derek had a way of making decisions without asking me first, then framing them as no big deal. One month, he traded in our perfectly fine sedan for a truck we needed for the shop. Another time, he took out a small loan for new equipment without mentioning it until after the paperwork was signed. When I questioned him, he'd laugh it off, tell me I was overthinking, that he had everything under control. The truth was, I trusted him because I wanted to. I didn't want to be the suspicious wife, the nagging partner. My mother had raised me to believe in people, to give them the benefit of the doubt. Derek knew that. And he used it. I remember one night, maybe 6 months ago, I came home from a double shift to find him and Lena sitting at our kitchen table, going over receipts. She looked up, startled, like she'd been caught doing something wrong. Derek smiled and said, "She's just helping me get the books in order." At the time, I thought it was nice of him to involve someone who knew accounting better than he did. Now I wonder if that was the night they started making their real plans. My days blurred together. I'd get up before sunrise, pack Derek's lunch, head to the diner, and sometimes not come home until after midnight. I missed birthdays, skipped holidays, and always told myself it was worth it, because we were building something. I didn't see the way Derek's eyes drifted when I talked, or how often he stepped outside to take a call. I didn't question the sudden trips to meet suppliers in the next town over. I ignored the way Lena started wearing new clothes and jewelry, things I knew she couldn't afford on an entry-level salary. I thought I was being a good wife. Now I know I was making it easy for him. The night I overheard that phone call, everything shifted. My life wasn't the quiet, steady path I thought it was. It was a minefield, and I had just stepped on the trigger. And the thing about triggers is, once they're set off, there's no going back. Our little town looked like something out of a postcard. Red brick storefronts, a white gazebo in the park, and a main street that smelled like fresh bread from the bakery. It was the kind of place where everyone waved, even if they didn't know you. The diner where I worked sat right at the corner of Main and Willow. From my booth by the window, I could see Derek's auto shop across the street. That shop had been his pride and joy since before we met. A squat, weathered building with 2 service bays and a neon sign that buzzed louder than it glowed. When Derek convinced me to invest in the expansion, I'd imagined it thriving, a bigger showroom, new lifts, maybe even a waiting area with coffee and magazines. In reality, the expansion meant knocking down the back wall to add a 3rd bay, repainting the front, and hiring Lena as his office manager. Derek told me business was booming, but I rarely saw more than 1 or 2 cars parked out front. He always had an explanation. Slow season, parts delays, customers paying in cash. I didn't question it. I wanted to believe. Our home was a modest 2-bedroom just a few blocks away, painted a cheerful yellow with white trim. I'd planted roses along the walkway last spring, a little patch of beauty I tended on my rare days off. Inside, the living room held mismatched furniture I'd collected over the years. The kitchen was small but warm, and the bedroom, well, it had become more of a place to sleep than anything else. Derek and I were rarely home at the same time. When we were, we usually ended up in separate rooms. Him tinkering in the garage or watching TV, me folding laundry or answering work texts. The easy closeness we'd once had was replaced with a polite distance, like 2 roommates sharing a mortgage. The few times we went out together were usually to community events. Derek liked being seen. At the annual Harvest Gala, he'd shake hands, tell stories about our business, and make it sound like we were partners in every way. I'd smile and nod, never mentioning the 14-hour shifts or the fact that I hadn't bought a new pair of shoes in over a year, because every spare dollar went to our future. The gala was coming up again in just 3 weeks. It was the talk of the town, the one night a year when everyone dressed up, the local band played until midnight, and the raffle prizes included everything from a flat-screen TV to a weekend getaway at the lake. I had no idea at the time that the gala would be the stage for one of the most humiliating moments of my life. But standing there in our kitchen that night, listening to Derek's whispered promises to another woman, I began to see every corner of my world differently. 3 weeks might not sound like much, but in a town like ours, it was enough time for every little detail about the Harvest Gala to become public gossip. Who was wearing what? Which local businesses were donating prizes? even what the mayor's wife planned to serve at the dessert table. Derek thrived on that kind of attention. He'd already picked out a new suit, charged to our joint credit card, of course, and was talking about how we needed to present ourselves as the couple everyone envied. "You'll wear that blue dress," he said one evening, not as a suggestion, but as an instruction. "The one that makes you look put together." I swallowed the sting of his words. I knew exactly which dress he meant. I'd bought it years ago for my cousin's wedding back when we still had a little extra in the bank. It fit me well, but it wasn't new. Still, I nodded and said, "Sure." Our life looked solid from the outside, but inside, the tension was thick. I started noticing more things I'd ignored before. The way Lena's car was often parked outside the shop, long after closing hours. The extra cologne Derek wore on certain late nights. The way he always locked the office door when I stopped by unannounced. The shop itself had changed too. The walls were freshly painted, there was a new coffee machine in the break area, and Lena's desk was cluttered with little gifts. Bracelets, a potted plant, a framed picture of her and Derek at what looked like a county fair. When I asked about it, Derek laughed. "She won it at the raffle, and I just happened to be there. Don't be paranoid." I told myself not to push, but my instincts were already whispering louder than his reassurances. At home, the quiet felt heavier. I found myself sitting in the kitchen after work, staring at the bills, while trying to figure out how we were always cutting it so close despite both of us working full-time. Derek always had an explanation. Unexpected repairs at the shop, suppliers raising prices, the cost of expansion being higher than expected. It was during one of those evenings that I noticed the Harvest Gala invitation on the fridge. Our names were written in gold script side by side, Mr. and Mrs. Derek Mitchell. I traced the letters with my finger, wondering if, by the night of the gala, that title would mean anything at all. I didn't know yet how everything would unravel, or that the gala would turn from a night of community celebration into a public battlefield. All I knew was that my perfect small-town backdrop was about to become the scene of a war I never asked for, but one I intended to win. Derek Mitchell wasn't the kind of villain you spotted right away. He didn't snarl or slam doors, he didn't scream to get his way. He was the kind of man who smiled while pulling the rug out from under you, and then acted shocked when you hit the floor. When we first met, I thought his confidence was a strength. He could walk into any room and make people like him. He remembered names, asked questions, and laughed easily. But over time, I realized that charm wasn't generosity, it was a tool. Derek used charm like a locksmith uses picks, to open doors that weren't his to open. He knew how to read people. If you needed to feel valued, he'd praise you. If you needed to feel important, he'd give you responsibility. And if you started to question him, he'd twist the conversation until you were apologizing for even asking. I'd seen hints of it before we married. Small things, like him telling a white lie to get a discount, or using someone's name to skip a line. He'd wink at me afterward, like we were co-conspirators in some harmless game. I laughed then. Now I know those were rehearsals. Lena was his latest project. She was 24, fresh out of community college, and working at a clothing store when Derek rescued her with a job at the shop. She called him Mr. Mitchell for about 2 weeks before it turned into Derek and then D. He gave her the front office, told her she was the face of the business, and started buying her lunch every day. From what I overheard that night, Lena wasn't just some innocent distraction. She was his partner in crime. And like Derek, she knew exactly how to play her part. Sweet and shy when I was around, bolder when it was just the two of them. It made me sick to think of them laughing at my expense, planning my financial ruin while I worked myself to exhaustion. But Derek's betrayal wasn't just about money or even love. It was about control. He wanted to decide how I lived, what I knew, and when I found out the truth. He wanted to walk away not only with my savings, but with the story that I had failed him, that I had driven him into Lena's arms. And in a small town like ours, perception is everything. If Derek managed to spin that story before I exposed him, I wouldn't just lose my marriage, I'd lose my reputation. Derek's talent for manipulation didn't end with me or Lena. He had a way of weaving himself into the good graces of everyone who might one day be useful. The banker who approved our mortgage, the parts supplier who gave him credit, even the mayor's brother who owned the property next to the shop. They all thought Derek was a stand-up guy. He played the role so well that if I accused him without proof, I'd look bitter or jealous. That's exactly what he counted on. And then there was Lena. She had mastered the art of calculated innocence. Her social media was filled with inspirational quotes, photos of her cat, and the occasional "grateful for my amazing boss" post. But when I looked closer, really looked, I noticed the subtle signs. The bracelets Derek had given her, the way she angled photos so the expensive coffee drinks he bought were in frame, captions like, "Some people really believe in you." In our town, where gossip could ruin a person faster than debt, Lena's image was gold. She was the sweet girl next door, rescued by the generous shop owner. What people didn't know was that she was also the one sending him photos of me at work, tracking my schedule, and helping him move money from one account to another. That kind of betrayal wasn't just personal, it was surgical. The worst part? Derek didn't even try to hide his pride in what they were doing. That night, I overheard them. He spoke like a man congratulating himself on a brilliant business deal. "She doesn't even read the papers I give her," he'd said. "By the time she notices anything, we'll be long gone." It was almost worse than catching him in bed with her. Cheating is emotional treason. But this was a calculated dismantling of my life. I realized then that Derek wasn't desperate. He wasn't trapped or acting out of passion. He was deliberate. Every decision, every smile, every small favor was part of a larger plan to gut my finances and my reputation in one strike, and that made him dangerous. Derek wasn't going to stop just because he got caught in a lie. If I confronted him too soon, he'd spin it, make himself the victim, maybe even convince Lena to file some kind of harassment complaint against me. I'd seen him twist stories for less, which meant I needed to be smarter, more patient, and above all, invisible, at least until I was ready to step into the light. Because Derek thought he was the only one who knew how to play the long game. He was about to find out how wrong he was. The night of the Harvest Gala arrived with the kind of crisp October air that made your breath visible. Strings of warm lights draped over the town square, the band tuned their instruments in the gazebo, and the smell of cinnamon cider drifted through the crowd. I'd spent the last 3 weeks preparing, not just for the event, but for the possibility that something might happen there. Derek had been in a strangely good mood all week, which only made me more suspicious. When we arrived arm in arm for appearances, I could feel eyes on us. People smiled, waved, and made small talk about the shop's success. Derek played his part flawlessly, laughing at jokes, complimenting outfits, shaking hands. Then I saw Lena. She was standing near the raffle table in a deep red dress, her hair curled, a champagne flute in her hand. She looked like she belonged there, like she was part of our circle. And when her eyes met Derek's across the room, the air shifted. It was quick, just a flicker of recognition, the tiniest smirk, but I caught it. And so did Mrs. Harris, the town's unofficial gossip queen, standing beside me. "Isn't that your husband's assistant?" she asked, her voice dripping with curiosity. "Yes," I said simply, taking a sip of my drink. Before I could move away, the raffle began. The prizes were announced one by one, laughter and applause filling the air. Then the band started to play. Couples drifted to the dance floor, and Derek excused himself, saying he needed to check on something in the coat room. My instincts told me to follow. I slipped away from the crowd, weaving through the hallway until I reached the half-open door of the coat room. Inside, Derek stood with Lena, his hand on her waist, their heads close together. "You sure you can get the last transfer in tomorrow?" Lena whispered. "Yeah," Derek replied, grinning. "By Monday, she won't have a dime left to fight me with." My chest tightened, but I stayed still. My phone was already recording from my pocket. And then, as if the universe wanted to hand me my moment, Mrs. Harris appeared behind me. She saw what I saw, and her hand flew to her mouth. By the time Derek and Lena realized they weren't alone, the damage was already done. Derek's face drained of color when he saw me standing there, phone in hand, Mrs. Harris peering over my shoulder like she'd just stumbled onto the biggest story of her life. "Claire, this isn't..." He started, but I cut him off. "Save it," I said, my voice steady. "I heard everything." Lena tried to step back, but Mrs. Harris blocked the doorway with surprising speed for a woman in her 70s. "Oh, don't mind me," she said sweetly. "I'm just making sure I get the full picture before I, talk to anyone." Derek's jaw tightened. "We should talk privately." "I think we're past that," I replied, lifting my phone. "This recording says more than enough." His eyes flicked to Mrs. Harris, then back to me. I could see the calculations in his head. How fast he could spin this, who he'd need to talk to first, what lies might save him, but it was too late. The whispers had already started in the hallway as people passed by, catching fragments of our tense voices. I stepped into the room fully, closing the gap between us. "Here's what's gonna happen," I said. "You're gonna walk back out there, and you're going to act like nothing happened. Because the moment you make a scene, I send this recording to every person in your contact list, and the bank." Lena's hand trembled around her champagne glass. You're making a mistake." "No," I said sharply, my gaze locking on hers. "The mistake was thinking I wouldn't find out." I turned and walked out before Derek could respond. Mrs. Harris followed, her expression a mix of triumph and concern. "Honey," she whispered, "you know I'm going to tell people, right?" "I'm counting on it," I said. By the time the band finished their second song, the undercurrent of gossip was everywhere. People glanced at Derek and Lena, their polite smiles tighter than before. I stayed calm, greeting neighbors, sipping cider, letting the story spread without lifting a finger. Derek tried to approach me once more before we left, but I sidestepped him, thanking the event organizer for a lovely evening. The real battle, I knew, would start tomorrow. But tonight I had planted the seed. And in this town, once a seed of scandal is planted, it grows fast. By the time we walked out of the gala, I could feel the shift. Derek wasn't the man everyone admired anymore. He was the man people were starting to question. When the adrenaline from the gala wore off, the weight of it all hit me like a brick wall. I sat in my car in the driveway for almost an hour after we got home, staring at the dark windows of the house I had paid for, wondering how I could still feel like a stranger there. Derek went inside without saying much, probably busy thinking of how he'd spin the night's events. I stayed put, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tight my knuckles turned white. My chest felt heavy, like all the air had been sucked out of it. Inside, I could hear the faint clatter of him moving around in the kitchen, the fridge door opening and closing. I didn't want to see him. Not tonight. I slipped in quietly, went straight to the bedroom, and locked the door. Sitting on the edge of the bed, I let my shoes drop to the floor and buried my face in my hands. For the first time since overhearing that phone call, I let myself cry. Not the silent tears I'd held back for weeks, but the kind of crying that shakes your whole body. All the memories came flooding in. My mother's voice telling me to protect my future, the long nights at the diner, the extra shifts, the sacrifices. And for what? So the man I trusted could gamble it all away for a fling with someone who thought helping him steal from me was a romance? I felt small, powerless, like I'd been walking through my life blindfolded while Derek rearranged everything behind my back. And then came the fear. What if he drained the accounts before I could stop him? What if he found a way to make me look unstable? What if, somehow, he still managed to win? The thought of losing not just the money but the house, my mother's last gift, made my stomach turn. I barely slept that night. Every sound in the house felt like a threat. Every creak of the floorboards, every hum of the refrigerator, every sigh from Derek in the other room reminded me that the enemy was under my roof. By morning, I looked like a ghost. My reflection in the bathroom mirror had swollen eyes, pale skin, and hair matted from restless tossing. I didn't recognize myself. And the worst part? A part of me wondered if I even had the strength left to fight him. The next few days blurred together into a haze of exhaustion and dread. I went to work, plastered on a smile for customers, and tried not to think about the ticking clock on my finances. But the moment I got home, the mask slipped. Derek acted as though nothing had happened. He still left early in the mornings, still came home late, smelling faintly of cologne and motor oil. He didn't mention the coat room, the recording, or Mrs. Harris. That silence was worse than any argument. It was as if he was daring me to break first. I found myself avoiding the kitchen when he was in it, skipping meals just to keep from sitting across the table. I'd lock myself in the bedroom and pretend to read, though the words on the page never registered. At night, I'd stare at the ceiling, the shadows on the wall shifting with every passing car. My mind spun through scenarios: how he might retaliate if I confronted him, how quickly he could empty the accounts, how easily he could twist the story in his favor. One afternoon, I caught myself in the middle of a shift, staring blankly at a coffee pot that had finished brewing 10 minutes earlier. My coworker Gina touched my arm. "Honey, you're scaring me. You look lost." I wanted to tell her everything, but the fear of it spreading before I had proof kept my mouth shut. Instead, I forced a laugh and said, "Just tired." But I wasn't just tired. I was unraveling. By the end of the week, I could feel my grip slipping. My body ached, my head throbbed constantly, and even simple tasks felt overwhelming. Every time my phone buzzed, I jumped, half expecting it to be the bank calling with bad news. One night, I collapsed into bed fully clothed, too drained to shower or even brush my teeth. Derek was still out, probably with Lena, and for a brief moment, I wished I could just disappear. Pack a bag, leave town, start over somewhere no one knew me. But then I thought of my mother. I could almost hear her voice. "Don't you dare give him the satisfaction." Tears stung my eyes again, but this time they didn't fall. I clenched my fists, taking a slow, shaky breath. Yes, I was hurt. Yes, I was tired. But I wasn't finished. And the more Derek pretended nothing had happened, the more determined I became to make sure he regretted underestimating me. The shift from despair to determination happened faster than I expected. It started on a Tuesday afternoon when I got a call from my mother's oldest friend, Margaret. She lived 2 towns over and had known me since I was born. I hadn't told her about Derek yet. She just called to check in. We chatted for a few minutes before she said, "You know, your mom always told me she left something for you. Something besides the money." I frowned. "What do you mean?" She said, "It was in case you ever found yourself in trouble. Said you'd know when to use it." That evening, I went up to the attic where I'd stored the boxes from my mom's old house. Tucked inside a worn shoebox was a sealed envelope with my name on it, written in her looping handwriting. My hands shook as I opened it. Inside was a short letter and a document. The letter read, "Claire, if you're reading this, it means you've run into a problem you can't solve alone. This document is a share certificate for the Mitchell Auto property lot. Yes, the one Derek leases. I bought it years ago through an investment group. He doesn't know I own it. If you ever need leverage, this is it." I stared at the paper in disbelief. The shop wasn't Derek's property, it was mine. He'd been paying rent to a faceless company, never realizing my mother had quietly bought the land. It hit me like a lightning bolt. Derek's entire plan depended on that shop. Without it, his business empire crumbled. I grabbed my phone and called a number I hadn't dialed in years. Uncle Ray, my mom's cousin. He was a retired attorney with a sharp mind and a knack for keeping secrets. When I explained what I'd found, he chuckled. "Sweetheart, this is better than a winning lottery ticket. Not only can you stop him from using that shop as collateral, you can evict him if it comes to that. Legally, you hold all the cards." For the first time in weeks, I felt something close to power. Derek thought he controlled the board. He had no idea I'd just discovered the piece that could knock his king over in one move. That night, I barely slept, but it wasn't from anxiety this time. It was from planning. I pulled up every lease agreement Derek had signed with the property management company my mother had used as a front. The terms were crystal clear. Failure to meet payment obligations or engaging in fraudulent activity could result in immediate termination of the lease. And thanks to my recordings and the courtroom incident, I had more than enough evidence of fraudulent activity. By morning, I was on the phone with Uncle Ray again. "If we move quickly," he said, "we can serve him with notice before he even realizes who owns the place. That'll knock him completely off balance." The idea of blindsiding Derek was intoxicating. For weeks, I'd been the one caught off guard, scrambling to react. Now I had the chance to be the one setting the trap. But the real beauty of it was this: if I timed it right, I could hit him on 2 fronts. Legally evict him from his own shop and expose his theft to the bank in the same week. I spent the next 2 days gathering everything I needed: bank statements showing the strange transfers, the power of attorney he'd tricked me into signing, screenshots of Lena's texts to him, and the recording from the gala. Uncle Ray reviewed it all and said, "Claire, this isn't just a civil matter. This is criminal fraud." I didn't tell Derek anything. I went about my routine as if nothing had changed, packing his lunches, greeting him when he came home, even asking about his day. Let him think I was back to being the docile wife who never questioned him. Meanwhile, I coordinated with the property manager to deliver the eviction notice. It was scheduled for Friday at noon. Thursday night, Derek was in an unusually good mood. "Big day tomorrow," he said, smirking. "Might be time to start celebrating early." I just smiled. "I'm sure it will be." What he didn't know was that by noon the next day, a courier would be standing in his office, handing him a letter that said he had 30 days to vacate the premises or face legal action from the property owner. And when he flipped to the last page, he'd see my signature. For the first time since this nightmare began, I wasn't just surviving Derek's game. I was about to rewrite the rules. Friday morning felt different. I woke up early, showered, and put on the navy pantsuit I hadn't worn since my mother's funeral. It fit snugly but still sharp, the kind of outfit that made me stand taller. I dried my hair, applied just enough makeup to bring life back into my tired eyes, and for the first time in weeks, I didn't see a ghost in the mirror. I saw a woman with a purpose. The plan was in motion. By noon, Derek would be holding that eviction notice in his hands, but I wanted him to see the change in me before that moment came. Over breakfast, he looked up from his coffee. "You're dressed up. Got something special today?" I smiled. "Just taking care of business." He smirked, probably assuming I meant errands or work paperwork. Let him. After he left for the shop, I headed downtown to meet with Uncle Ray and the property manager to finalize the delivery. I signed the last of the documents with a steady hand. The property manager, a no-nonsense woman named Sheila, grinned as she slid the papers into her briefcase. "Don't worry, sweetheart. I'll make sure he knows exactly who's in charge." From there, I went to the bank. I'd already spoken to the fraud department earlier in the week, but today I handed over the compiled evidence, bank statements, text screenshots, and the gala recording. The officer I met with, a sharp-eyed woman named Denise, listened carefully, her pen flying across the notepad. "This is enough to freeze the accounts temporarily," she said. "It'll buy you time to protect your assets." It felt like I'd just put on a suit of armor. Before heading home, I made one last stop, a boutique I hadn't set foot in since before I married Derek. I bought a deep green dress for myself, not because I needed it for a specific occasion, but because I wanted to remember what it felt like to spend money on me. That afternoon, I stood in my kitchen with the sunlight streaming through the window, sipping tea and waiting. At exactly 12:17 p.m., my phone buzzed with a text from Sheila. "Delivery made." I could picture the scene perfectly. Derek, behind his desk, opening the envelope, reading the eviction notice, and then flipping to the last page to see my signature. And for the first time in this entire ordeal, I felt like I was the one holding the match, while he stood in the gasoline. By the time Derek came home that evening, I was ready for him. He walked through the door with a face like thunder, tossing his keys on the counter so hard they skidded across the surface. "What the hell is this?" he demanded, waving the eviction notice in the air. I took a slow sip of my tea. "Looks like a legal document to me." "You own the property? Since when?" His voice was sharp, almost panicked. "Since before you and I even met," I said calmly. "My mother bought it years ago. I didn't think it mattered, until you gave me a reason to make it matter." He cursed under his breath, pacing the kitchen like a trapped animal. "You can't do this. You'll ruin everything." I set my cup down and looked him straight in the eye. "No, Derek. You ruined everything. I'm just making sure you can't take me down with you." For a moment, he looked like he might lunge at me, but then something shifted. His shoulders sagged, his tone softened. "Claire, we can fix this. We can still work together." I almost laughed. The man who'd plotted to drain my accounts, smear my name, and run off with his assistant was suddenly talking about teamwork. "Not interested," I said simply. I left him in the kitchen and went to my bedroom, shutting the door behind me. My heart was pounding, but not from fear, from exhilaration. That weekend, I went further. I changed the locks at the shop, had the bank issue new account numbers, and met with a local business attorney to explore selling the property to a competitor Derek despised. Every move was deliberate, every step calculated to remind him that he was no longer in control. I also started taking better care of myself. I booked a haircut, joined a small yoga class at the community center, and reconnected with friends I'd distanced myself from during the marriage. The more I invested in myself, the less power Derek had over me. By the end of the week, I was no longer the woman crying on the edge of the bed, wondering if I had the strength to fight. I was the woman standing in the center of her own life again, strong, clear-headed, and unafraid. And Derek was finally learning what it felt like to be on the losing side of a game he thought he'd already won. The opportunity for public payback came sooner than I thought. 2 weeks after Derek received the eviction notice, the Chamber of Commerce held its monthly meeting, a gathering of local business owners, bankers, and town officials. Derek rarely missed these. He liked being the center of attention, bragging about the shop's growth and hinting at expansion plans. This time, I decided to attend. I arrived in the same deep green dress I'd bought the day I froze the accounts, hair neatly styled, a quiet smile on my lips. When I walked into the meeting hall, heads turned, not because I was Derek's wife, but because I was there alone. Derek was already seated near the front, Lena beside him in a cream blazer that was trying too hard to look professional. His eyes widened when he saw me, but I just gave a polite nod and took a seat across the room. The meeting began with the usual updates, community projects, local events, fundraising goals. Then it was time for business spotlights, where members could share news about their companies. When Derek's turn came, he stood and launched into his usual charm routine. "We've been fortunate to grow steadily over the past year," he said, glancing at Lena as if she were his business partner instead of his accessory. "Big plans for the next quarter, including—" I raised my hand. "Excuse me, Mr. Chairman," I said, addressing the head of the chamber. "Before Derek continues, I think it's important this group knows about a recent change in ownership affecting his business." The room went quiet. The chairman looked puzzled. "Change in ownership?" "Yes," I said, standing. "As of last week, the property his shop occupies is under my direct control. Due to multiple violations of his lease, financial fraud among them, he's been served with an eviction notice. He has 28 days left to vacate." Gasps rippled through the audience. Derek's face flushed crimson. "That's not—" "She's twisting the—" I held up a manila folder. "I have all the documentation here, including bank records, lease agreements, and recorded statements." I let my eyes sweep the room. "I'll be happy to share them with anyone who'd like to verify the facts." Lena shifted uncomfortably, her eyes darting toward the door. The chairman cleared his throat. "Mr. Mitchell, is this true?" Derek sputtered, looking for an escape, but the silence in the room was crushing. For the first time, the king of small-town charm was on his knees in front of the very audience he'd worked so hard to impress. Derek's voice cracked as he tried to salvage the situation. "This is just a misunderstanding. My wife, ex-wife, she's angry and trying to ruin my reputation." I tilted my head, letting a small, cold smile form. "I don't need to ruin your reputation, Derek. You've done that all by yourself." A murmur of agreement rippled through the room. One of the bankers in attendance, Mr. Fulton, spoke up. "If what she's saying is true, Derek, we'll need to review your accounts immediately. Fraud is no small accusation." And just like that, Derek's posture deflated. Lena placed a hand on his arm, but he shook it off, his eyes darting toward the exit. I stepped forward, placing the manila folder on the chairman's table. "Everything you need to know is in here. Dates, amounts, recordings, and yes," I said, locking eyes with Derek, "it includes your conversations with Lena." Gasps filled the room again, sharper this time. Lena's cheeks turned scarlet. She grabbed her purse and stood abruptly, muttering something about needing air before slipping out the door. I didn't stop her. Instead, I turned to the audience. "I've worked in this town my whole life. My mother worked herself to the bone to make sure I had a future. Derek tried to take that from me, and he would have succeeded if I hadn't found out in time. I'm here today not just to protect myself, but to make sure no one else trusts him with their business or their money." Mr. Fulton nodded gravely. "Understood." The meeting adjourned soon after, but the damage was done. People clustered in small groups, whispering and shaking their heads. Derek avoided looking at anyone as he left, his usual confident stride replaced with something stiff and awkward. As I stepped outside into the cool evening air, I felt lighter than I had in months. The war wasn't officially over. There were still legal steps to take, but I just won the battle that mattered most. Everyone knew the truth now. And in a town like ours, that truth would spread faster than any lie Derek could tell. By the next morning, his empire of charm would be nothing more than smoke, and I'd be the one holding the match. In the weeks that followed the Chamber of Commerce meeting, the ripples of what happened spread through town like wildfire. Derek's reputation collapsed almost overnight. Customers stopped bringing their cars to his shop. Suppliers pulled their credit lines. The bank, after reviewing the evidence I'd given them, froze his business accounts permanently. 2 months later, Derek closed the shop's doors for the last time. The eviction notice had expired, and the property was legally mine. I sold it to a neighboring repair business, a family-owned shop with a spotless reputation. They paid me a fair price, and I knew my mother would have been proud to see the land put to good use. As for Lena, she disappeared from town within a week of the meeting. I heard whispers that she'd been fired from a part-time job she took after leaving the shop. Something about dishonesty with the till. I didn't care enough to confirm it. She was no longer part of my story. Derek, on the other hand, wasn't so lucky. The fraud case against him moved forward quickly. Between the financial records, the recordings, and witness statements, the prosecutor had more than enough to push for charges. Derek pled guilty to avoid a trial and received 3 years of probation, a hefty fine, and a permanent mark on his record. The day I heard his sentencing, I stood in my kitchen with a cup of coffee, looking out the window at the roses I'd planted. The winter frost had touched their petals, but they still stood tall, defiant against the cold. That's how I felt too. My life wasn't perfect. Divorce papers were still in motion, and there were days when the weight of the past year hit me harder than I expected. But I had my home, my savings were secure, and my future was mine again. I also had something I didn't before. Proof that I could survive the worst and still come out standing. And that, I realized, was worth more than any dollar amount Derek could have stolen from me. Spring arrived slowly, melting away the last traces of winter. I took it as a sign. One Saturday morning, I stood in the middle of my freshly painted living room, sunlight spilling through the windows. The walls were a warm cream now, the furniture rearranged, the space finally feeling like mine, not ours. I'd replaced the photos of Derek and me with landscapes from places I wanted to visit. I was already making plans to take my first real vacation in years. A week by the ocean, just me. A good book, and the sound of the waves. Friends who had quietly stepped back during my marriage began coming around again. We'd share coffee, swap stories, and laugh in a way I hadn't in so long. I realized how much of myself I'd let slip away trying to hold together something that wasn't worth saving. The best part was the peace. No more secret phone calls, no more second-guessing my instincts, no more walking into my own home feeling like an intruder. Just quiet, safe, and mine. Sometimes I'd think about my mother. I'd imagine her sitting across from me, nodding with that proud, knowing smile she had. She'd probably say, "See, you were stronger than you thought." And she'd be right. If there's one thing I learned, it's that strength doesn't always look like a fight. Sometimes it's signing the papers, sometimes it's changing the locks. Sometimes it's simply choosing yourself every single day until the pain dulls and the joy returns. Derek's fall was his own doing, but my rise, that was mine. So here's my truth, for anyone who finds themselves where I once was: you are not weak for loving someone who betrayed you. You are not foolish for trusting. The shame belongs to the one who lies, not the one who believes. And when you finally stand up, when you take back what's yours, you will feel something no one can take away: freedom. Because the moment you stop letting them write your story is the moment you start living it on your own terms. Dear friend, life has a way of testing us in ways we never imagined. Sometimes the trials don't come as storms or loud explosions. They come quietly, in the form of people we trust, slowly teaching us the hardest truths. The Stoics remind us that we can't control what others do, only how we respond. and perhaps that's the greatest freedom we can claim. I know the pain of being betrayed by someone you've built your life with. I know how it feels to doubt yourself, to wonder if you could have prevented it. But here's the truth. You are not defined by what others do to you. You are defined by what you choose to do next. When someone shatters your trust, you stand at a crossroads. One path leads to bitterness, the other to growth. You can't change the fact that the betrayal happened, but you can decide how much of yourself you'll let it take. And the day you choose to reclaim your story is the day you start living on your own terms. So let go of the illusion that people will always treat you the way you treat them. That's not how the world works. What you can do is hold fast to your values, your dignity, and your peace of mind. As Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." Remember, healing is not about forgetting what happened. It's about making sure it no longer controls you. And when you rise from that place of pain, you rise wiser, stronger, and freer than before. Because the greatest victory is not proving them wrong. It's proving to yourself that you can't be broken. If this story touched you, I'd be grateful if you could like this video, share it with someone who might need it, and subscribe for more stories that inspire strength and courage. Your support helps us keep telling stories that matter. Thank you for being here and for letting me share this journey with you.